This week in post, can you add more light to a photo in post-processing? It's a Q&A episode. Hey everyone, Scott Davenport and welcome to In Post. A couple of quick things before we get into this week's Q&A episode. Number one, I have a few spaces available in a workshop at the end of July in San Diego. It's a weekender, so it's a really tight, real focused workshop. About half the time we're on location, half the time we're talking post-processing and other things, photography. If you want to come spend a weekend in San Diego with me, check it out. Pop over to my website and you can check out the workshops page. The second thing is I want to get more of your questions. You can send everything my way. You can contact me through my website, comments on the video, tweet if you want to take a photo of your question and share it with me on Instagram. That works too. However you'd like to send me your questions, I would love to hear it because your questions help me think about my photography and hopefully my answers are helping you out. And it's a win-win, upside for everybody. So with that, let's get into today's question. Silesh in California asks, can I add more light, more sunshine to a photo? Well, the short answer is no, you really can't. There's a longer answer. This came up during one of the workshops earlier this year in San Diego, where we had been out on an overcast morning and the sun finally started to break toward the end of the session. But there were some earlier shots where things felt a little bit overcast. I have a good example of something you can do with trying to brighten areas of the photo. So I've got this photo here that this was actually at sunset, but the sun got swallowed up at the horizon. And so portions of it are kind of dark. There's some things you can do to simulate exposure and adding, we're going to use exposure, but adding sunlight. Someone's going to drag a filter on here because this is where the sun was going down. So if the sun were shining here, I could try to start adding, more brightness. And this may actually be better served by using a radial filter because a little more rounder, more natural way that the light would start to fall on the earth. But the other trick, which is why I chose a graduated filter, let me spin that around, is using this color option at the very bottom. We can pick, something with a tone of, I'm going to overdo this a little bit so you can see the foreground starting to get much more brighter, adding a little more of that sunshine feel. If the sun were low, it'd be like in the oranges range, and that would be touching the sand in a certain way, and we'd get that illusion that there was more light in the scene, more golden sunlight than there really was. So those are a couple of things that we can do to nudge the photo in the right direction. But in the end, we can't really add more light. The camera is going to capture whatever the ambient light, or if you're using artificial light, is there when you take the shot. Next question is from Peter in Washington. He asks, I'm using Lightroom's graduated filters and they're always red. Why? This dovetails nicely, which is another reason I chose that graduated filter for the previous example. So when I hover over the pin, we get this red box showing up, this red areas. And that's Lightroom saying this is the portion of the photo that is being affected by the filter. Now in Peter's case, what's going on is this is always red. As soon as he activates the graduated filter, it's this big red blob. And at the lower left corner, there's this little checkbox that says show selected mask overlay. Now if I hit that and turn it on, always going to be on. I'm not hovering over the pin. My mouse cursor isn't even in the preview window. Always going to get this box. Now, if you don't see that option, it probably means your toolbar is hidden. I press the T key, I'm hiding the toolbar, and you're looking at the scene going, I don't know where in Lightroom to turn this off. I'll press T, you'll find that checkbox, you can turn it off, and then you're back to the behavior, which I prefer. Hover over the pin, and then you'll get the view of what the filter is affecting. Our final question is from Eve in Belgium, and he's asking about textures. How do you classify and organize your textures, and how do you decide what texture is right for your photo? To set a little bit of context, Eve has hundreds and hundreds of textures, so I can understand exactly where he's coming from. How do I organize all of these? For me, I don't actually have a real system to organize them, mainly because I'm using on-one layers when I do my texturing, and so textures come in whatever texture packs are delivered, and they kind of sit where they sit. There's not really good facilities within On1 to rearrange them, short of going under the covers and trying to do things behind the program's back. That always tends to lead to problems in any software where you try to do things outside of it. So, but thinking about it, what would I do if I were using something like Photoshop and just had a set of folders for different textures? And my answer is going to dovetail into what do I choose and why do I select a certain texture for a photo? When I'm looking to add a texture, the first thing I'm either looking to do is either give it more darkness and make it moodier, or to try and brighten it up and maybe even fade it and give it a vintage feel. So that suggests luminance. Maybe one way of categorizing the textures is darker textures versus lighter textures. And then the second one is how much grit or how much of the texture, the detail do I want to show through on the photo. And that's more like the material. If it's something softer, like maybe a soft fabric, or maybe more of an abstract where something that was in motion is just kind of blurry and that becomes a texture, versus something very hard, concrete, rock, or stone, or rusted metal, things like that. So those two put together might be a way to attack classifying your textures in certain ways. In the end, all models are wrong. Some are useful. It's almost never going to be a perfect fit in every situation. That's a couple of ideas that might help get going. And that does it for this week in Post. Hope you've enjoyed the Q&A episode. Again, if you have questions, please send them my way. I'd love to hear from you. And until next time, my name is Scott Davenport.